All right, I will call this meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee to order. Will the Secretary please take the roll?
Senator Flores, Senator Orenshaw,
Here.
Senator Lang, Senator Wynn, Senator Hansen, Senator Krasner, Senator Hansen, Senator Ellison, Chair Scheibel.
And I am here. We will start in a subcommittee consisting of Senators Hansen, myself, and Senator Orenshaw. And I will open up the hearing on AB 451.
Oh.
Just before you start with the Secretary, please note that we're coming out of our subcommittee meeting. We are now meeting in a full committee of the Senate Judiciary. Please mark Senators Ellison, Hansen, Wynn, Scheibel, and Orenshaw present. Mark Senators Flores, Lang, and Krasner present when they arrive.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Scheibel and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. My name is Sandra Howdiggy, and I represent Assembly District 41. I am honored to co-present Assembly Bill 451 with my colleague, Assemblymember O'Neill. This bill addresses the critical issue of suicide prevention by facilitating voluntary and temporary firearms storage agreements while providing civil liability protections for licensed firearm dealers and law enforcement agencies who participate in these efforts. Suicide is a public health crisis that affects families and communities across Nevada. According to the Office of Suicide Prevention, Nevada has historically ranked among the states with the highest suicide rates, particularly among seniors and veterans. Firearms are involved in a significant majority of these suicides, highlighting the need for strategies that create time and space between individuals in crisis and lethal means. Assembly Bill 451 is designed to encourage voluntary out-of-home firearm storage as a proven method to reduce suicide risk. This bill is modeled after similar legislation in Louisiana and Montana and other states, which have successfully implemented civil liability protections for firearm dealers and entities offering temporary firearm storage. Both measures passed with strong bipartisan support. The Louisiana measure passed their House with 94 yeas, 0 nays, and passed their Senate with 34 yeas, 0 nays. By establishing clear guidelines and protections, Assembly Bill 451 aims to expand access to safe storage options across Nevada. I will now like to turn it over to my co-presenter, Assemblymember P.K. O'Neill, for some remarks, and then just walk the committee through some quick stats, Chair.
Chair, may I proceed? Would you like me? Thank you. Chair Scheibel and members, I appreciate being here today with you all to present this bill. I'm Assemblyman P.K. O'Neill. I represent District 40, which you are welcome to Carson City, my district. I've also got to say, in my several terms within the legislature, this is probably one of the first times that Ms. Howdiggy and I have been co-presenting a bill together. And it's a true pleasure in this effort. And I want to talk about AB 451 very quickly. And I want to stress a couple points of it. In the development of this proposed legislation, we have stressed the rights of Second Amendment. We have made it purely voluntary. No record keeping is maintained. There are no records at all. It's a time tested in other states, proven opportunity for people to reduce that availability of firearms at their choice. At their choice. As I said, it is strictly voluntary. And it provides it's already being done in a limited number of states, but it's being already done here in Nevada too. So the bill is really to give the federal firearms licensed dealers, as you'll hear us say very often, the FFLers, some liability, some protection while they are providing storage for that. So with that, I will just say thank you, and I open up to any questions after we finish a short presentation.
Thank you, Chair. We did submit this presentation for the record, but I did want to go over just some stats with the committee. So according to the 2023 National Veteran Suicide Prevention Annual Report, 6,392 veterans died by suicide in 2021, with 72% of those deaths being firearms. In Nevada, there are currently no specific statutes protecting FFLers who store firearms for individuals. And these are the two Senate bills that passed. In Louisiana, it was House Bill 260, passed with unanimous support. And here are some quick stats that we received from the Armory Project. I do believe that we have Dr. Gala True from the Armory Project and Dr. Joe Dibble from the Washoe County Suicide Prevention Alliance on Zoom to help us answer questions when we get to that portion. Oh, I believe Mr. Dibble's here in person today. Okay. So before the Louisiana passed their legislation, they had 3 firearm retailers willing to join the Armory Project for safe storage. After they passed their bill, it increased to 22 retailers. In Arkansas, 16 firearm retailers said no due to civil liability. 3 were willing to join the pilot program with the Armory Project. Oops. I think, is that it? Oh, and here are some more stats. From 2021 to 2024, Utah had a total of 37 people sign up and use voluntary surrender. From the same time period, Virginia had 53 people sign up. And from 2019 to 2024, Washington had 42 people sign up and use the voluntary surrender programs. One of the stats that was really interesting that we learned from the Armory Project, that between Louisiana and Arkansas, there have been 850 firearms stored for at least 80 individuals since 2021. That is our presentation, Chair, but before we turn it over to questions, I do want to show the committee a quick 20-second video that was filmed by the Washoe Suicide Prevention Program on how voluntary storage works and how it helps. So I know it's a brief video, but it kind of gives you some insight into how voluntary storage works in Washoe County and how we envision it working throughout the state of Nevada. And before we go to questions, Chair, we did want to let the committee know that I submitted an amendment on May 5th removing certain language, and so it is a friendly amendment that Assemblymember P.K. O'Neill has accepted as well. And with that, we are ready for questions.
All right, thank you so much. I will open it up for questions from members of the committee, starting with Senator Hansen.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Right now, we have no protection at all, right, for anybody that has those. This is like a brand new section of law. So if it doesn't pass, they currently could be held liable if somebody turned into a weapon and then they turned around and gave it back. So the idea behind this is to create a safe space, if you will, for the dealers to allow them to take in a weapon in some really unfortunate circumstances. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Senator Hansen. Assemblymember Sandra Howdigi, for the record. Yes, that is correct. When we saw this type of legislation get passed in other states, we saw how many more dealers participated. In Louisiana, again, it was 3 FFLers who participated prior to their bill being passed, and then it jumped up to 22. And the more FFLers we can get to participate in this, the more accessible this type of storage is for somebody who is in crisis.
Yeah, I saw the stats. They're very interesting. Yeah, it seems like a reasonable thing to do to me, because if you're going to, if I'm going to be a dealer and right now you have some terrible situation and you want to voluntarily give me a weapon that you may use to do yourself in, and right now, if for some reason you come back and I give that to you and you then go and do yourself in, you could be held civilly liable in the absence of this law passing, correct? Okay. Yeah, last question then would be the gross negligence. What is the definition? You had some concepts on that you wanted to share?
PK O'Neill. Senator Hansen, great question. I appreciate it. And actually, I had consulted with your committee attorney, and I think he would be best to answer that question. If that's acceptable.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Chair. The Nevada Supreme Court has, in a couple decisions, provided kind of a brief description of what gross negligence is. Those cases have not given a lot of guidance, but I've looked around at what legal commentators have said about what gross negligence is. And there's a particularly good definition, I think, for gross negligence. It's a lack of care that demonstrates reckless disregard for the safety or lives of others, which is so great it appears to be a conscious violation of other people's rights to safety. Gross negligence is a heightened degree of negligence representing an extreme departure from the ordinary standard of care, falling between intent to do wrongful harm and ordinary negligence. Gross negligence is defined as willful, wanton, and reckless conduct affecting the life or property of another. It's considered more harmful than ordinary negligence because it implies a thoughtless disregard of the consequences and the failure to use even slight care to avoid harming the life or property of another. And I could go on at great length, but I'll stop there if that's okay.
If that answers the question, then
That does. I mean,
Okay.
it seems to me like the bill's pretty reasonable, and we have some pretty high standards in it. And currently, there's no civil protections at all for somebody that would participate in this. And I assume to reach the gross negligence standard in the bill, you would literally have to hand it back to them while they're telling you they're going to basically shoot themselves or something. I mean, it's a very, very high standard if what I just read is there. So thank you, Madam Chair.
thank you. Any other questions? We'll go to Senator Ellison.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for my tardiness. But there is a question. So if somebody was going to go into a gun shop and ask the gun to be locked up, they're not telling you why, because you could be going out of town or whatever. But if they come back, say, okay, I'm back, I want to get my weapon, and they go kill themselves, so you're saying the store would not be liable or would be liable?
Assemblyman P.K. O'Neill. Senator Ellison, what we're saying in giving protection to the store, the FFL holder or the representative, that they would not be liable unless there's certain level of negligence, of gross negligence or actions upon their part, as what your legal advisor just stated. It's a high standard to meet, and it would have to be, I forget his exact example, but you return the firearm to the individual as they're yelling or professing to you what their harm they're going to do with this upon return. And I may go back to legal to make sure I stated that correctly, and I'm answering your question appropriately.
Follow up now. And we're looking at weapons and suicide, but how many people actually kill themselves with prescription drugs, and the drugs coming over the borders like crazy, fentanyl? I mean, there's tens of thousands more deaths caused by legal drugs than there is by weapons, is there not, as you being a police officer? That's number one. And two, there's no way you can go back and say, okay, the drug dealer come over across the border, sold it, and we all took it, and so many people died. You're not going to be able to prove that. So I think I hope we're not picking one out against the others. So if you can answer that, please.
As soon as I can, the button. PK O'Neill, for the record. Senator Ellison, you're right. In actuality, there are laws that allow us to, if we can identify in a homicide that it was due to an overdose, we can go back to the dealer if we can locate them and charge them with the homicide. So yes, we can address some of that. This law or this proposed legislation is just dealing with one issue within the realm, the greater realm of suicides, of dealing mainly with or specifically with firearms, and allowing you, if you're in this, I call it a dark place, to surrender your firearm. You'll hear some testimony coming up from individuals about how even that removal for an hour, just removing it for an hour, can give the person time to reconsider and come out of that darkened place. So it's just this opportunity that we're providing. As I said, it respects Second Amendment rights. It respects and protects the FFL dealers. And it is just this opportunity, the voluntary opportunity. Voluntary is what I'll keep stressing, and I wish I could say it in bold letters. This activity or this availability to separate yourself from an individual, to separate himself from that firearm and deal with where he or she may be at that time.
Thank you.
Sure. We'll go back to you, Senator Hansen.
Thank you. Just want to double check. You just mentioned even a couple of hours, but the agreement to make this thing fit, you've got to have a firearm hold agreement. The agreement has to make sure that you, as the dealer or law enforcement agency, has to keep the weapon for a minimum of 21 days, right? So, and then you can return it under the terms. Again, that's, I just want to make sure, because it isn't going to be like I'm going to turn it into the cops and then 3 hours later I'm going to come back and say, hey, I feel better now. Can I get my gun back? Because there was no firearms agreement at that point.
Senator Hansen, thank you for the question. Assemblymember Sandra Howdicke for the record. That was actually stricken from the language via the amendment. It was 3A2, which was stricken. In speaking to organizations like the Armory Project and the Washoe County Suicide Prevention Program, we did not want any obstacles to someone using this service during a time of crisis. And if all they needed was an hour, then we didn't want to prevent them from going in and surrendering a firearm, because then they would not have access to it for 21 days. And in looking at what other states did and what other legislation in other states, some of the most successful programs didn't have the time restrictions, and so we opted to making the program as accessible as possible, because we want people in crisis to use this program.
Okay. I actually like the original bill, to be honest with you. Thank you for that clarification.
Also, if I may add, Senator Hansen, PK O'Neill for the record, it's written or oral agreement. So that's how much latitude we have given to make this available to the individuals.
Other questions from members of the committee? Senator Krasner.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for your presentation. So I have a question. Section 1, sub 2, sub B, the the licensed firearm dealer or local law enforcement agency knew at the time the person sought to retrieve a firearm pursuant to a firearm hold agreement that the person was. So this is when they're not, the agency is not immune from civil liability. So just taking a far-reaching hypothetical, somebody is going on vacation, they bring their gun in to be held. When they come back, they want to go pick up their firearm, and the person at the counter says, "So how you doing?" "Oh, I'm depressed. It's been a really bad 2 weeks. My family member passed away, and I'm here to pick up my gun. Can I please have it?" And can they say no? Can that agent say no, you can't have it. You just told me you're depressed.
Hold agreement that the person was demonstrating unlawful. I think legally the person would have to be demonstrating behavior that a person would engage in unlawful use of the firearm, right? So they would have to demonstrate that they are going to hurt themselves or somebody else.
So I appreciate that you think that. Is there somewhere in writing that says these are the things the person has to be doing? Like, are there physical things they have to be doing, or because, demonstrating behavior that the person would cause harm to himself, somebody might say, well, he told me he was very depressed. He told me his family member who was very close to just died, so I refuse to give it back to him. Is that a possibility with this legislation?
They'd be in violation.
PK O'Neill for the record. Senator Krasner, in your hypothetical, you're saying the person has not, the definition as was given earlier to gross negligence or an unlawful act, the person's only saying that they're still depressed, that they're, I forget exactly who you said, a family member has recently passed away. That would not necessarily, and once again, maybe we should access legal, but that does not raise up to an unlawful act, nor does it really give inference to that gross negligence to return the firearm. So I would say that the person, the FFLer, would return the firearm because there's nothing that really prohibits them from refusing. And they have met their minimum responsibilities. But as I said, it's not reaching, to me, it would not be reaching to the gross negligence level, so they'd still be protected in that action. If we mentioned every hypothetical, not sure there's enough trees out there for us to put that into legislation. So that's why we have used some of these definitions and terms, such as the gross negligence unlawful act, that they give this broad definition, and then it can be determined later. And like I said, I may once again return to legal for that better definition, for substantiation of my understanding.
I think we worded the language as we worded it, Senator Krasner, and this is Assemblymember Sandra Howdigi for the record, because allowing them to FFLers to temporarily store it doesn't take it into their inventory. And so if an FFLer wasn't willing to return a firearm, it's something that they would have to then log into their book with ATF, their inventory, which they currently aren't required to do the way this is written.
Thank you, Chair. So in that scenario, if the person said, I'm really depressed and just got back from a funeral, last couple of weeks I've been really depressed, then you're saying that law enforcement agency or dealer just has to give it back? Or what action would they take? They just give it back, or would they hesitate? I mean, what would happen in that scenario?
Well, it would be up to the law enforcement agency or the FFLer who is in possession of the firearm to determine whether they are demonstrating behavior that would cause them harm or someone else, right? And that's where the protection is. If they have determined that, no, they came in and they said they were depressed, but they weren't demonstrating behavior that they would hurt themselves or hurt others, then they can return the firearm, and that's where the gross negligence comes in, right? They would have to prove, but it was gross negligence of the FFLer or law enforcement agency in returning that firearm.
We'll go back to Senator Hansen.
Thanks, Madam Chair. My apologies. Actually, it might be for law enforcement if they come up. Currently, if I'm a dealer, and I think, or you think you're suicidal and you come to me and say, hey, can you take my weapon away? And I say, get the hell out of my store. Is there current liability for somebody like that? And I have no idea with the cops because, they're a government institution, so I don't think they have the ability to just say, I don't care what you do, it's not my problem, But if you're a dealer, a private party dealer, is there any liability currently for you if somebody shows up in your store and you think he's going to, shoot himself or whatever, if you turn them away?
PK O'Neill, for the record. Senator Hansen, from my time, actually both as a law enforcement officer and also during my time when I was a division chief and the NICS or the Brady check was under my division, it was a unit within my division, whenever you go to purchase a firearm, you have to fill out the ATF 4473. And that is one of the questions that is mentioned in there about suicide and mental health issues. If you fail to pass that, then the dealer is not allowed to sell you a firearm. This bill is strictly a voluntary, since the dealer, the FFLer, is not in possession or it's not in their inventory, there is no 4473 being filled out. What I would assume, and you're correct, we may have the answer from either law enforcement or some of those FFLers that are currently partaking, is they may have set up a policy within their office or within that business to address some of those issues of contacting either a family member or somebody else. But as we get back to, in our record keeping and our research that we've done over the last several months, because we actually started working on this back last year, well into the early fall of last year, that issue has never been brought up where a person came in and demonstrated behaviors and then went out and killed themselves. What has happened from some of the lawsuits that brought forth the need for the indemnification is that other circumstances came into play, and I don't have the quotes on the exact court cases, but it was basically a effort of just to go after the FFLers for this. And that's where Louisiana, which started it, came out.
To me, like the bill is actually a good idea in the right direction, what I'm getting at. I mean, right now, if somebody came into a private dealer and was suicidal and they turned them away and the guy goes out in the parking lot, does himself in, could you be sued by his family because, hey, my friend came in, you guys ignored it, and then 5 minutes later, bang, you could have saved his life. Now, with law enforcement, I'll be interested to see how they handle that. I assume they already have policies in place, but I see them sitting over there, so maybe they'll be coming up to testify at some point. But to me, it seems like the idea of what you're trying to do with the bill is a good one in that you're trying to allow people in really unusual circumstances an opportunity to voluntarily turn in a firearm that could be used in a suicide. So, and then I like the 21-day thing, really, because, what I'd hate to do is like this scenario that one of our colleagues just mentioned, come in, turn it in, 3 hours later I come back and demand it back, and then you give it back to them. They're still depressed. They were just wanting the opportunity to get the gun back and do what they planned to do in the first place. 21 days, you got a lot of cooling off window there, but Anyway, thank you for the third bite at the apple, Madam Chair. But yeah, if the cops are going to come up, I do want to, they'll know the question, and maybe I'd love to hear how they actually deal with situations like this.
Button doesn't like
Red means hot, so you want to speak when it's red, even though I know in other rooms, red means stop. It's not just you. No, it's not just you.
It would be, though. PK O'Neill for the records. Senator Hansen, I agree with you. It's a step. We're trying to make a step in an availability to reduce an operation. And I want to give you, not a hypothetical, I'm going to do this very, very quickly. I'll give you a real life scenario. Several years ago, as a uniform officer, we were just coming out of Vietnam. It was in the early 70s. I got a call of a gentleman contemplating suicide at the Veterans Memorial Center that we had along Biscayne Boulevard in Miami. I went and met with the gentleman, spoke to him for probably a good 40 minutes about a variety of things, had coffee with him, and at the end of the conversation, the individual said, yes, take me down to the VA hospital and to get help. He said, and we got up, we were walking out to my car. Before we got out there, he said, just one favor though, can I go to the bathroom? And I naturally said yes. It was within literally seconds of that door coming closed that I heard the gunshot, went in there, and the gentleman killed himself. So I thought at the time, and felt at the time, and other people did too, that he was not suicidal at the given moment, that we had spent all this time discussing life, what had happened before, where we are today, and why we are here today, and what tomorrow will bring to us. So it's very difficult to, and I failed. Whatever reasons, I failed. But that's where I'm getting to. There's nothing that's really going to prevent every circumstance out there. As I said, we don't have enough trees to print it all on. The best we've come up with and proven in other states is having the availability to voluntarily get distance between the individual and their firearms in a secure location to deal with their issues. Then they can come back when they feel that they're out of that, have the dealer return, or actually they'd be returning to themselves their firearms. And after that, unless there were severe, and I'll always get back to our legal staff, the definitions of unlawful or gross negligence acts, that FFL or that law enforcement agency is protected from what happened to me. So that's, this bill is important, and it is one step, and I do appreciate your support of it. The 21 days really met with a lot of people's resistance to it, and I'll turn it over now. Hopefully, the nice thing about tag teaming is I've hopefully given Assemblymember Howdy enough time to come up with a better answer.
Thank you for sharing your story, Assemblymember O'Neill. I was actually just going to reach out. I know we have Dr. Gallatrue from the Armory Project who might be able to answer some of your questions, Senator Hansen, regarding FFLers and the liability before this policy was enacted in other states. And Dr. True, are you on Zoom? Senator Hansen, would you like us to have Mr. Dibble and answer your question regarding the liability portion of the FFLers or during the testimony?
Actually, no, I think I'm fine. I think overall, obviously we have none right now, so whatever step we take in that direction seems like a positive. We obviously want to deal with some really traumatic situations, but we also want to provide some level of protection, especially for private licensed dealers. Yeah. May be confronted with some unusual circumstances like this.
And I do appreciate your questions too, because I know that my colleague and I came to the 21 days together, but upon hearing from industry, hearing from groups who wanted people to be able to use the services, one of the big concerns with 21 days was, dealers or law enforcement agency hanging on to firearms longer than somebody needed, and people being able to access their firearms that they are legally able to access. And so we decided to remove the 21-day to make the program more accessible, but then also to get to the point of Senator Krasner's point of making sure that the FFLers or law enforcement agencies were returning firearms when they needed to be returned.
And it is voluntarily compliance. Nobody's forcing them to do it. So, okay. Well, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Other questions from members of the committee? There is just one thing that I wanted to clarify, because we did get some questions about the return of the firearm, and I want to make sure that I'm reading this correctly. And basically, the way that I read Section 2 is that if somebody, so let's say that someone has already surrendered their firearm, they've probably signed a written agreement. That's what it sounds like happens in many of these cases, saying that, I'm surrendering my firearm voluntarily, I will get it back in. I understand it's not 21 days now, it could be 48 hours, it could be 72 hours, maybe there's not a time frame. So the firearm is now in the custody of the FFL. Person goes, hopefully receives treatment, therapy, is ready to come back and retrieve their firearms. The purpose of Section 2, I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly, is to say that if the person walks in and all they say is, hello, I'm ready to get my firearm back, and the licensed dealer hands them back their firearm, and they still go on to commit a crime or an act of violence with that firearm, nobody can sue that dealer for handing their firearm back, because that's what they are supposed to do. Conversely, if the person comes back, but they're showing signs that maybe they're not maybe, they're showing this demonstrated behavior that they're going to engage in unlawful conduct. They are, to be frank, they're putting the licensed firearm dealer in a very difficult position. They are putting that licensed firearm dealer who, I think they go through the long licensing process because they are responsible gun owners who want to promote responsible gun ownership in the community. And so you want to ensure that that firearm dealer who's standing behind the counter and has somebody in front of them who has previously surrendered their firearm, if that person is still making statements, I need my gun back because I still don't want to live, I can't carry out my plan unless you give me my gun, whatever it is that they're saying, you're trying to provide that licensed dealer with the protection in law to say, actually, I'm not going to hand this back to you. And you're protecting that firearms dealer from a lawsuit down the road where the person who didn't get their gun back would otherwise come back and say, hey, I was entitled to have my firearm returned. You're carving them this kind of out in the rare, unfortunate case that someone's not ready to retrieve their firearm, but they're trying to anyway. Am I understanding?
Correct, Chair Scheibel. Thank you so much for the explanation, because it gives them protections on both ends, because then they would be in violation and they would not be protected if someone was demonstrating that behavior and they returned those firearms.
And ultimately, if there is a debate as to whether or not the firearms dealer acted appropriately in either direction, they gave a firearm back to somebody who they weren't supposed to, they failed to return a firearm to somebody who they were supposed to, that would ultimately be decided in, if we followed everything to the fullest extent of the process, that would be decided in court. And a judge would be looking at this legislation or looking at this law, looking at the behavior and making a determination like they do every single day in the course of their job to say, yes, the firearms dealer met their obligations, or no, they did not, and they would then order the appropriate remedy.
Correct, Chair Scheibel, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And with that, I think you've answered all of our questions, and we very much appreciate that. So we will move on to testimony. We will start with testimony in person in support of AB 451. We will start here in Carson City.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Jason Woodard with the Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs Association. I would just like to thank the bill sponsors for working with us on the language of the bill and creating a scenario where this is something that both law enforcement agencies and FFLs can opt into. We think this is an important and also very useful mechanism for people who are experiencing challenges, and provides a legal means for them to take a break or separate themselves from their firearms so they can further seek treatment, and further protects the agencies and the FFLs. I'm happy to answer any questions. I have a premise.
Indeed, there is at least one. Go ahead, Senator Hansen. Oh, sorry, we want to hear from Mr. Walker first, too. Okay.
Good afternoon,
Only
Chair.
fair.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel, members of the committee. Jason Walker, JASONWAOKER, representing the Washington County Sheriff's Office. Supporting Assembly Bill 451 is amended as well for all the reasons outlined in the presentation. And just like my colleague, Lieutenant Woodard, attested to, this is a good, viable option for someone that is in crisis to separate themselves from a firearm for a period of time. It's a good bill for that reason.
Thanks, Madam Chair. No, after I went through the bill, and even after going through the amendment, you got to have a firearm hold agreement, got to be written or oral, it's got to be the owner of the firearm, and then before you can release the gun back, it has to be according to the terms of the agreement that they already had agreed to. I mean, it's very, very tailored. But my question for you guys, though, is right now, what do you do? If somebody, I'm sure you've both been on the beat in the field, and you've probably been called to, potential suicide situations. I'm sure you deal with that there. Undoubtedly, you remove the whatever the weapon may be from the individual, get it out of the house. But this is a little different. This is like they come to your station or something, or see in your patrol car, or I'm not sure how that part of it works. What do you guys do now if somebody voluntarily comes to you and says, hey, I'm feeling whatever, and I'm nervous what I'm going to do. Will you keep this weapon? I mean, I can't imagine it's very, have you ever experienced that in your years in the field? And if you had, how do you deal with it currently?
Thank you for your question, Senator. Jason Woodard, Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs. I'll speak first for my own personal experiences. I have experienced that, and to answer your question, it's going to be dependent upon the agency. There's a couple of issues. One of the issues is storage is always a challenge regardless of the size of the agency. Evidence storage is a challenge. So one of the things, or one of the considerations, is does the agency have the capability of storing the firearm? In addition to that, when we're approached and someone's explaining that they're experiencing suicidal ideations and they're also armed, we have to do our due diligence to make a determination as to whether or not this person potentially is going to be subject of a legal hold for the preservation of essentially themselves. So those are all considerations for us. The last thing that I'll say is that we will do our due diligence to make an effort to find a way to get the firearm into the possession of somebody who can safeguard it for that period of time. Now that might be with a spouse who has a friend who has a gun safe, and we are able to work through that through some form of agreement. I think that the reason why this particular piece of legislation is so helpful and also important is because it really is clarifying a lot of that language and saying, hey, it is okay for us to take it to an agency, for this agency to hold on as long as those agreements are in place. And really, the scenario that we're talking about is the most challenging scenario. When someone expresses suicidal ideation and they're armed and they meet all the qualifications of a legal hold, that solves the problem for us, and in most cases we take that firearm, or in all cases we'll take that firearm. Where it becomes challenging is we don't have enough to establish a legal hold. However, the person is trying to surrender that firearm. They're trying to do essentially what is best for everybody involved, but we don't have those legal protections to allow us to essentially do that, right? It is an agreement, but now it's an item that we have to book into evidence for safekeeping, so it creates some other challenges for us. We see this bill as alleviating that, but also making it optional for there to be a third party involved. And now we have an FFL that we could potentially take the firearm to, or they could take the firearm to, alleviating that burden for us in law enforcement. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Also, this, I didn't mention, this is a voluntary arrangement. It's not even, if you guys come across somebody that is suicidal, at that point it's not voluntary. This is somebody who's literally coming to you for help. So
Jason Walker for the record. Senator, same for our end. We have run into it out in the field as well as somebody that comes up to the front desk. Generally, the professional staff that's there at the front desk, they'll call a patrol asset for all the reasons that Lieutenant Woodard brought up. The fact that somebody says, I don't feel right and I have a firearm. Is there a way that you can help me with our safekeeping? The deputies and supervisors that are out there have a little bit more training and experience to pick up on some of those nuances. And again, like you had touched on, it is a voluntary thing. And again, our goal is to remove that person from that firearm for that period of time. Whether we jump into an agreement to hold their firearm for safekeeping or not, I think it's dependent on that situation. But what we'd like to do is get them into a resource where, like Woodard had said, if we don't have to store it, it's better for us. If it can go to somebody else, that's okay. But our main goal is to help out that person for what the bill is intended for. Separate them for that reason. So we have taken them from the field and at the front desk before and return them within X amount of time. I don't work on that side of the building. Our detective division does that, and they have their policies and procedures for working on that. And I don't want to say that it's a common practice, but it does happen.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Krasner also has a question for one or both of you. Please go ahead.
Chair, thank you. So back to that same scenario, the person goes on vacation, so they leave the firearm with law enforcement agency. They come back, they say, the law enforcement agency says, how are you? Well, depressed, it's been a really tough 2 weeks. A close family member died. I'd like my gun back. And law enforcement then makes a decision. It's their discretion if that person is exhibiting suicidal tendencies, which depression would be one of them. And law enforcement says, I just think we should keep it a little longer for you because of you're exhibiting some suicidal behaviors and depression, and we're concerned. That person disagrees with law enforcement and they want their gun back. Law enforcement says, no, we have a duty to protect you. You're exhibiting suicidal behavior, in our opinion. So what does the person do now? Do they have to go to court to get it back from law enforcement, or what would be the procedure?
Senator, thank you for that question. Jason Woodard, Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs. I know you're throwing a hypothetical out here, so I'm going to do my very best to answer your question. With the details.
Do you want to tag in our legal counsel?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But allow me to say this. The initial amount of information is limited. So what you described here would prompt one of our officers to ask further questions. So if someone expressed that they had a tough week, or they had a tragedy in their life, they were depressed, we would spend time fleshing that out. We would ask, are you experiencing suicidal ideations? Have you thought about killing yourself? If you are experiencing suicidal ideations, what would your manner or mechanism be? We might ask point blank, are you asking for your firearm back because you plan to hurt yourself? So there would be further investigation done to try and make the best possible determination as to whether or not they were explaining that they were depressed, or they were explaining that they were experiencing suicidal ideation. I will now ask legal counsel to assist. Yes.
If you'd be so kind, Mr. Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the specific question, that wasn't entirely clear to me what I'm addressing.
What would the process be if somebody thought they were entitled to get their firearm back, but the person, either law enforcement or the firearms dealer, thought they were exhibiting those behaviors and refused to return the firearm? What could that person do?
Yes. I think what the procedure when you want to have personal property returned is to file a civil action for that. It depends on the amount of the value as to what the jurisdiction would be. Typically, that would be something you would just file in small claims court because the value would be under $10,000. If it went above that, then you'd still be in justice court until you got to $15,000. Some people, depending on how many firearms you're talking about, it could be more than one. Some people have very large firearm collections, and presumably you could get to the district court level at some point. But that's, if you remember from law school, writ of replevin. I think that was called. It's been a while since I've heard that, but that would be the procedure that someone who wanted a firearm back, if somebody else, law enforcement, a firearms dealer, was not returning it.
Thank you.
All right, I think that concludes our questions for you. We really do appreciate you being willing to answer questions, even though we're in the testimony portion of the bill hearing. And with that, we will continue with support testimony here in person in Carson City. If you're new to whether you're new or not, the button to turn on the microphone looks like a sticker on the table. So go ahead.
Chair and committee members, for the record, my name is Andrew Lee Pilbit. I'm the state chairman of the United Veterans Legislative Council, representing the 250,000 veterans in our state. We also look after our Guard and our military and their families. We're in favor of this bill, and we think that it's a solid step forward. Having been a member of the Governor's Challenge, I spent 5 years in that group, but due to meeting with all of you every year, my duties have changed in the last 3 years. So we highly endorse this. It's a good move forward. And yeah, it is difficult when you say both written or oral agreement, but unfortunately, I don't think some of the individuals that need the help would end up signing something. So an oral agreement really needs to be there when they're in that mental state. So again, the United Veterans Legislative Council totally support this bill, and please sign it. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your service. Got to turn your microphone on.
Can you hear me now? For the record, this is Joe Dibble with the Washoe County Suicide Prevention Alliance, and also Northern Nevada Public Health. Thank you for your time this afternoon on hearing this bill, AB 451. I'm going to cover some statistics really fast, and some of these were covered by the bill co-sponsored, but I want to reinforce a few things here. Suicide is a growing and urgent public health crisis. In 2023 alone, over 49,000 people in the United States died by suicide. Approximately 654 of those were Nevadans, and 400 of those Nevada suicide deaths involve firearms. Nevada consistently ranks as one of the highest death rates in the country for suicide, ranking 12th highest in 2023. Suicide by firearm is particularly lethal, with over 90% fatality when a gun is used in an attempt. One alarming fact when I was tasked at trying to reduce gun violence is that firearm-related suicide deaths outnumber homicide-related firearm deaths by a ratio of 2 to 1. Think about that. So research does show that suicidal crises are often brief, only minutes or hours sometimes. So delaying access to the most lethal means of suicide can prevent fatal outcomes. It can. Temporary secure firearm storage during a time of crisis can save lives and is the safest option for suicide prevention, as it maximizes the time and distance between an individual at risk and the lethal means. This is why Washoe County Suicide Prevention Alliance, or WISPA, has launched this promising approach, educating Nevadans about temporary secure storage during a crisis or a time of crisis, and creating a temporary secure storage network. And that includes support of the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco Firearms Explosives, the ATF, and also several local firearm retailers. Participating FFLs, such as local gun shops, voluntarily store these firearms temporarily for individuals or families during a time of concern. All right. Our network provides public awareness for suicide prevention, provides free gun locks and safes. It clarifies the legal pathways for temporarily storing firearms in storage, and including local temporary storage options and locations, and facilitates suicide prevention training for the community and for FFL staff. However, participation in our project is currently limited, and the top barrier of participation is liability concerns by gun shops over storing firearms temporarily.
Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Dr. Spring Myers. I am a retired mental health chief, flight chief for the Air Force, 21 years. I am also co-chair of WISPA. I know we say that shortly. It's actually Washoe County Suicide Prevention Alliance. That said, one of the things that has come up as we have talked to many FFLs, as Mr. Dibble stated, is that the barrier was their liability. There had not been any realistic liability challenges, honestly, but it was a concern. So this bill would help us increase the number of FFLs that participate in our website. One of the issues that I heard mentioned was time and space, and this is actually my quote, time and space between crisis and action is all you need. If you can do 5 minutes, you can prevent that suicide from happening by 24%. If you can go almost to an hour to prevent that person who's in crisis from access to their weapon, that can reduce it by 71%. As a veteran, as a mental health provider, I heard the question of if someone is sad or depressed. There's strict criteria for suicidality, and I appreciate law enforcement saying that if there was any suspicion of suicidality, that they would ask those questions. And then if there was a need for a legal hold or that sort of business, that would happen. A person being sad or depressed does not necessarily mean that they are suicidal, so we want to be careful in interchanging those terms. That said, if we can increase participation, we have more places that people can store their weapon, be they suicidal or have a teenager who is having a mental health crisis in the house, or have their grandchildren visiting, and they don't want their children to have access to the weapons. So again, this is one of those good Samaritan laws, and we just want to reduce the barriers that FFLs have to participate. When Louisiana did it, when they passed the law, I think before they passed the law, they had only 3 or 4 people or FFLs on their website. It increased 1,000% when they were able to get a Good Samaritan law there. So if we can just follow suit, we can reduce the suicide rates. Nevada is typically in the top 10. Right now, I think we're 12 or 13 for the nation in suicides. We want to reduce that, but even if we can stop one, that's going to be amazing. So although this doesn't address everything, it's a smart step in a smart direction, if that makes sense. That's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your testimony and for your service. We appreciate it. And I'm not sure if there's anybody else who wants to give in-person support testimony here there are more people. Excellent. Come on up. There are 2 chairs at the table. You're welcome to sit in those. There are also 2 kind of next to the tables if the people coming up after the next 2 want to kind of queue up in those chairs. Please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Cynthia Tate, and I reside in Reno, Nevada. I am a very, very active participant and advocate for WASPA, also known as Washoe Alliance, Suicide Prevention Alliance. I lost my 21-year-old son to suicide via a firearm. At the time of his decision to take his life, there was no option out there for safe storage for his firearm. Creating time and distance is very essential. As a mother who has lost their son, I ask you from the bottom of my heart to please pass AB 451 so no other household has to suffer the pain and anguish of losing one of their loved ones to suicide by lethal means. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Tarpey, and I am the General Manager of D4 Media Corp., a federal firearms licensee. As an FFL operating nationally and headquartered here in Nevada, we remain committed to complying with all applicable federal and state firearm laws. We specialize in the sale and consignment of collectible firearms, and for over a decade, we have built a structured, secure process for handling rare and high-value firearms from individuals across the entire United States. As part of our business model, we operate secure firearms storage facilities, both short and long term, across multiple states. These operations require us to maintain strict adherence to responsible storage practices and legal requirements as outlined by the ATF and by state regulations. The intersection of mental health and firearm ownership is a very complex and is deeply personal to myself. Suicide by firearm is a national concern, and it has personally affected my family in ways that words cannot fully capture, and I feel your pain. I do. While no single policy can solve this issue, we believe improving access to mental health resources for gun owners is one of the most meaningful steps forward. In situations where individuals may voluntarily seek to temporarily store firearms off-site during a mental health crisis, temporary secure storage can play a role in harm reduction. That said, FFLs must also navigate legal and liability concerns when offering this kind of assistance. Assembly Bill 451 offers a pragmatic framework for Nevada FFLs for providing Good Samaritan legal protections for those who, in good faith, offer voluntary storage to individuals experiencing a crisis. Similar legislation in other states, including Louisiana, Arkansas, and Montana, as we have discussed here earlier, has shown that this model can increase participation among dealers and offer an additional resource to communities without compromising business viability. As a business that supports lawful and responsible firearm ownership, we recognize the value in policies that protect both public safety and the rights of FFL holders, and we ask that you pass this. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today.
Hello, my name is Jordan Slotnick, and I'm the general manager of Reno Guns and Range. We are the largest indoor shooting range in Nevada, the entire state. So we definitely support this bill. We do provide storage. The issues around storage is very complex, as well as with the acquisition and disposition and the handling of firearms. We take it very seriously. That's why I'm part of WISPA. I've been in support of that of the program since its inception, I believe. But we would love for the support of this bill in order to protect not only us as FFL responsible persons and owners, but also for our employees and the people who are doing their best to support our community. And this is definitely a positive bill that would be beneficial for all FFLs in the state.
Thank you so much. I don't see anybody else coming forward to give in-person support testimony on AB 451, so we'll go to the phones, please, for support testimony on AB 451.
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to offer a testimony in support of AB 451, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I'm Kimberly Fergus, FERGUS. I rise in strong support of AB 451. This bill is a critical step in addressing the public health crisis of suicide in Nevada, especially among seniors, veterans, and the vulnerable populations. By establishing voluntary firearm hold agreements with licensed dealers and law enforcement, we provide a secure, out-of-the-home storage option for firearm owners who may be at risk for self-harm under these agreements. Oh God, listen to me. I wrote this and I can't even read my own writing. Importantly, AB 451 ensures that those holding firearms in good faith under these agreements are protected from civil liability, encouraging more firearm owners to seek safe storage without fear of legal repercussions. This is not about infringing Second Amendment rights. It's about saving lives and giving people a chance to safely store firearms as they need it most. I urge you to vote yes on AB 451. Thank you.
There are no further callers wishing to provide support testimony at this time.
Okay, then we will go to testimony in opposition to AB 451. Anybody wishing to testify in person in opposition is invited forward to do so now. I don't see anybody coming forward in Carson City or in Las Vegas. I see some movement, but I don't think they're coming forward to testify. So we will go to the phones for opposition testimony on AB 451.
Thank you. If you would like to provide testimony in opposition to AB 451, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. There are no callers wishing to provide opposition testimony at this time.
All right, then we'll move into neutral testimony on AB 451. Anybody wishing to testify in neutral is invited forward to do so now. Looks like, again, we have some movement down south, but they're not coming to the table to testify. So we will go to the phones, please, for testimony in neutral on AB 451.
If you would like to testify in neutral to AB 451, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue.
Cyrus, Hojjaty. My apologies. I was wanting to echo the comments of Kimberly Ferguson, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll echo her comments. Yeah, I know it's in the wrong position, but thank you.
That's okay. We'll have your testimony reflected in the support section. And with that, I'm sorry, broadcast, do we have anybody else on the phone to give testimony on AB 451?
There are no further callers to provide neutral testimony at this time.
All right, then that brings us to the conclusion of testimony. Not seeing any closing remarks from the sponsors. They thank us for hearing the bill. You are very welcome. We thank you for bringing this bill to us and for presenting to us this afternoon. With that, I will close the hearing on AB 451. I will open the hearing on AB 201 and welcome our presenters on that bill to the front of the room.
Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and members of the Senate Committee on Judiciary. My name is Erica Roth, and I'm proud to represent Assembly District 24 in Washoe County. Today I'm joined at the table by Jonathan Norman, the Policy Director for the Nevada Coalition of Legal Service Providers, and thank you for the opportunity this afternoon to present AB 201, which seeks to expand the circumstances under which a summary eviction is sealed. As members of this committee are aware, an eviction can create significant barriers for individuals and families seeking housing. These records can negatively impact credit scores, making it difficult to secure rental housing, employment, and even access to loans. The consequences of an eviction can be far-reaching and long-lasting. Even when the outcome is in favor of a tenant, a single eviction record can severely limit a person's ability to find safe and affordable housing, trapping them in a cycle of homelessness or substandard living conditions. While eviction records can affect all tenants, studies have shown that communities of color are particularly susceptible to this practice, and women with children are especially vulnerable. Current Nevada law allows tenants who are legally evicted to ask a judge to seal the record. This means the eviction will not be searchable or publicly available, providing tenants with a measure of protection against bias when seeking housing. AB 201 seeks to mitigate these negative consequences by expanding access to eviction record sealing. This bill builds upon existing Nevada law, which already provides for the automatic sealing of certain eviction case court files, and creates additional pathways for tenants to have their eviction records sealed.
With the chair's permission, I will now hand it over to my co-presenter to provide a more in-depth overview of the bill.
Chair, members of the committee, Jonathan Norman, NORMAN, Nevada Coalition of Legal Service Providers, which includes Northern Nevada Legal Aid and volunteer attorneys for rural Nevadans, and then in the South in Clark County Senior Law Program and Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. AB 201 does three things. One, it creates automatic eviction record sealing when a landlord does not respond to a motion for sealing. Two, it expands automatic record sealing to instances when a tenant appeals a case to district court and prevails on the appeal, and when the court finds the tenant was illegally locked out of the dwelling. And three, it creates a presumption that 1 year from the entry of order of eviction, that sealing the case is in the interest of justice, and that is not outweighed by the public's right to know. And now I'll just do a quick walkthrough of the bill. Section 1, subsection 2B, provides that when a landlord does not oppose a motion to seal a case, the court shall seal the case. Section 1, subsection 2E creates automatic sealing when a tenant appeals an eviction and prevails on appeal. Section 1, subsection 3B23 creates a presumption that 1 year after the entry of an eviction order, it is in the interest of justice to seal the case, and that is not overcome by the public's right to know. Section 1, subsection 6 requires judges to enter the basis for their decision. This is versus checking a box that says denied or granted, so that the litigants have some idea of the basis for a decision and when they maybe would want to file again. Section 1, subsection 7B conforms the definition of eviction case court file to ensure that when a tenant prevails, both the underlying eviction is sealed and the appeal. So that relates back to Section 1, subsection 2E. Section 1.5, subsection 4 creates automatic sealing when a tenant is illegally locked out and the tenant files a verified complaint and the court rules for the tenant. And with that, I believe we're ready for any questions. Thank you.
All right, questions from members of the committee. Senator Ellison.
When you don't pay a credit card, you get a bad credit report. You buy a car and you don't pay for the car and they come and repossess it, you get a bad credit report. So this goes on everything. You have a bunch of bank accounts that you had checking accounts and then bounce checks. They close the account and has a bad credit report. So how could you single out housing versus everything else that goes on the credit report?
Excuse me, Jonathan Norman for the record. I think because housing is so critical and that this serves as a bar to housing, that is a reason to create this exception. And we are trying to strike a balance. So two of the instances that we're creating sealing are when the tenant prevails on the case. So they win the appeal. Two, when they bring an action because they were illegally locked out by the landlord, that shouldn't be a record that bars them from future housing, right? So those are two of the things. I think the one that's probably the rub is the 1 year. It creates a presumption. Even in that instance, evidence would be presented to the judge to potentially overcome that presumption. So it would still be a judicial officer who is making that determination. It just creates a presumption so that it should be sealed. And I think over the last, as we've seen rents rise since I think 2019, the 40%, during the pandemic they rose 25%. And we see landlords, and I'm talking about big sophisticated landlords, using third-party apps such as RealPage to set rent and inflate, I believe, inflate the market to levels it shouldn't be at, the cost of rent, and there's litigation across the country around that. That tenants who, or if you lost your job, does that bar you from entering the rental market again? Should that be a scarlet letter that means you need to live at a weekly or something with your family? So I think those things combine to make it appropriate at 1 year to decide that we're going to create a presumption that allows people, families, to move on with their with their lives. So I think it's a policy determination. You know, for all those other things, whether it's credit cards or whatever, you'd have bankruptcy as the way to and then that's still going to be on your credit for, you know, a period of 7 years, I believe.
The other question I've got is, if you go to steal the records, the Justice Court wouldn't be able to do that. It'd have to be the District Court, is it not?
Jonathan Norman, for the record. Thank you, Senator Ellison. So the case starts in the Justice Court, the summary eviction case. So when they talk on, and it's, sorry, I'm looking for the definition of summary eviction case file. It is in sections 1(7)(b). I think they can seal the eviction case that originated there. Where it's the district court is needed or implicated as if there's an appeal. So it is our justices of the peace who are sealing these cases.
Okay, because I send a lot of people down to the courts to seal records on some things, but they send them up usually to the district courts, and that costs $1,000 or more because you got to have an attorney to go up there and represent that case. That's why I asked that question.
Yeah, I think, you know, we do a lot, or Jonathan Norman for the record, we also do a lot of the criminal record sealing, and I believe that's in district court, and maybe that's where it is, but I think it should be the court that the action is in.
Senator Orenshaw.
Thank you very much. Thank you for bringing the bill. I guess my question maybe for Mr. Norman is, for folks who have not been able to get these records sealed, is it your experience that they've had a difficult time in trying to find housing? And I'm wondering if you think a bill like this might help people, you know, get back on their feet who might have suffered job loss or, you know, a major family illness and, you know, gotten into rock bottom or near rock bottom and maybe are trying to get from that weekly into an apartment and not, you know, fall through the net and become homeless. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about some of the clients that this might help and the clients who didn't get their eviction sealed and maybe what their options were for housing.
Yeah, Senator Orenshaw, thank you so much for the question. I think you know, what I said in the first house is an eviction is a moment, but the consequences are years because you don't recover as a family and your options are going to be weeklies or second chance housing. And the instability that creates for that entire family unit, you know, when you talk about whether a kid being in a particular school, right, that's upset. And so there's cascading effects that happen when families are evicted to losing, you know, most or all of the personal property that they have because we have a pretty fast eviction process. So, you know, when you talk about losing all your personal property, having your kids removed from the school they're in, if you had community roots in that neighborhood or area, those are gone. So if you had somebody who helped you when, you know, you had to work late and they took care of the kids, that's gone. So I think that it is cascading and it takes years to recover because you're starting over really in a weekly or in second chance housing, which is pretty limited in Nevada. And I know Assemblymember Roth was also an attorney at Legal Aid, so she might have some, you know, clients that she worked with that she can speak to really directly.
Thank you, Erica Roth, for the record, and thank you so much for that question, Senator. Chair, through you to the senator. I think what's really important to remember when we're having these conversations about eviction proceedings is that we are talking about human beings. As Mr. Norman alluded to, I was a legal aid attorney in a prior life, and most of my clients were families and seniors. And I think that the narrative can get a little off the rails when we're talking about what kind of behavior or conduct results in an eviction. And, you know, we hear a lot, well, what about if there's nuisance? Or, you know, what about if they ruin the apartment? But what is nuisance? What does that look like? I had a client who was in her 80s who was evicted for nuisance because she was too weak to take her trash to the corner every week. that can be considered nuisance. So we as a body have already determined that it's appropriate to give people a fresh start when we're talking about housing. Both of our chambers, both of the parties in this building have recognized that we in Nevada are in a housing crisis. And we need to make sure that we are reducing barriers for folks who have been evicted so that they can get back into safe and stable housing, because it matters to our communities. It matters to all of us. That same client, my senior client, who was evicted for nuisance because she was too weak to bring her trash to the corner, the only housing that she then qualified were weeklies, because they did not do a records check on her. Now, those weeklies ended up being more expensive than if we could just get her into some stable housing. She did not have any family or kids in the community that she could rely on or turn to. And so then she was spending all of her Social Security checks on housing, and we were then trying to find her avenues to just get food on her table once a day. So, I just don't want it to be lost what it really means when we're talking about the people who are impacted by having an eviction on your record. And this is not a get out of jail free card. This is not just wipe your slate clean without having to do anything. It just recognizes that if you have been unjustly evicted, that we should automatically be sealing those records on appeal. If the landlord is not willing or does not want to participate in the proceeding, we should not be holding that against a tenant who is seeking to start over. And, we should be requiring our courts to say, these are the reasons why we denied your request. And it's a very simple and narrowly tailored bill, but it does have very far-reaching impacts on actual members of our community.
Thank you, Chair. May I have a brief follow-up? Thank you. In my practice as a public defender in juvenile court, I see a lot of kids that are living in households headed up by a single mom, and a lot of those families are one paycheck away from becoming homeless. So I just wonder, in both your legal aid practices and when you were at legal aid, did you see a lot of single moms that lost housing and were heading up a family, and that was their shelter?
Yeah, thank you for the question again, Senator Jonathan Norman, for the record. So not only do we see it in our practice, single moms who are paycheck to paycheck, but some of our partners did eviction court watching in Las Vegas Justice Court between this session and the last session, just to observe what was going on. And I think they found overwhelmingly it was, and if you go observe evictions, average hearing a few minutes, and you had a lot of moms with their kids at those eviction hearings, and it's really hard to watch that unfold in real time and know that there is nothing in the law that provides help in that moment, and there is little that provides help over the next year, 2 years. So this bill will allow those families, when appropriate, when they fit into this criteria, to move on. And then after a year, which if you think about being evicted and trying to figure out where you're going to live, a year's a long time to wait, but we've pushed it out to a year where that presumption shifts and you still have a judge making that decision. So I think your experience at the PD's office is echoed in what we see at legal aid and what you would see any day if you walk into a justice court around the state. And when you think of how many evictions are filed, I think the Supreme Court, they have an addendum to their yearly report, and it's usually over 80,000 summary evictions filed in our state. And over 70,000 of those are going to be in Clark County.
Thank you for the answer. I do see a lot of households set up by single moms in this situation. Thank you, Member. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Norman.
Any other questions? I'll go to Senator Hansen next.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Seems like one person we're kind of leaving out of this, though, is the judge. Surely a judge, I have a hard time believing your average judge is going to throw an 81-year-old lady out of her place because she can't take her garbage out, especially when the judges have access to all sorts of social service networks that they can direct them to. So I don't know if that example, while is an example, I don't know if it really holds true that consistently for every case involved. Now, going through the existing law, it started with COVID, kind of, we had an automatic sealing during COVID. Then if, under the existing law, if a court has basically dismissed an action, it's sealed. But now what you guys want to do with Section 1B, upon motion of the tenant, if the landlord does not file a response, then that tenant, even though they've gone through an eviction, an approved summary eviction process, can now basically hide that fact completely from the potential next landlord who may be concerned about whether or not the tenant could in fact pay his rent. And it's not an unreasonable thing in my mind that if you have in fact gone through a summary eviction process because the landlord doesn't file some motion, that the next landlord basically is going to go into the situation blind, not realizing that this individual may have serious credit problems.
Jonathan Norman for the record. Thank you for the question, Senator Hansen. I feel like I picked up 3 questions in there, so I'm going to try to knock them out one at a time. One, I do think the reality is that judges confined by the laws we have are evicting seniors, and yeah, they point them to resources, but that doesn't stop the eviction. And I'm happy to take any member of our legislative body to court just to observe and to see that firsthand, because it won't be me telling you, it'll be you seeing it in real time, and it's very powerful to watch. 2, the section 1, subsection 2B, really it's building on, in that same section 1, 3B, the tenant already has the ability to file a motion to seal that court record. It's just saying in instances when there is no response to that motion that the judge shall seal. And then finally, I think a better way to assess whether a tenant is worthy of renting is to look at that tenant now. Whether it's during the pandemic or right now, the turmoil you see in the economy where people are living paycheck to paycheck, looking at what they're earning now and where they are now, I think provides a better snapshot of whether they are somebody you would want to rent to than if, a year, 13 months ago, they had an eviction because they lost their job, their kid got sick, they had a car breakdown and they had to decide between rent and their car, which they need to get to work. So I guess, those are the 3 things I picked up. So I think it's building on a motion that exists. And in normal civil procedure, it's essentially would be a default. And that's the change that we're making.
Erica Roth for the record.
I'm sorry, let me add real quick before I forget. The existing law is 31 days after. Now on that 31 days, is that after they have been through a summary eviction process and were in fact evicted? Or is that when the eviction has been dismissed?
Jonathan Norman for the record. So looking at 3, Section 1, subsection 3, and then skipping down to B, I think those are for a granted eviction. So if an eviction is granted, a tenant may file a motion to seal that granted eviction case. And, the court has to go through, if you look down at B, subsection 2, and this is kind of the catch-all, sealing the eviction case court file is in the interest of justice, and those interests are not outweighed by the public's interest in knowing. And then you look at factors, and they have a few there. Circumstances beyond the control of the tenant that led to the eviction, other extenuating circumstances under which the order of eviction was granted, and then 3, which we have changed to add the 1 year, basically a presumption.
Okay, so you're basically kind of repeating section 2 in the new language in 3, right? Outweighing the public's interest. Okay, along those lines then, you're going to have a 1 year window. So basically I got evicted, and 1 year after that, I can go back and have my record sealed so that as I go forward, you want them to have a clean slate, right? Now, what's the 31-day thing? Maybe I'm confused on that. Isn't there a process in place now that after 31 days and they've been evicted, or is that after the eviction was denied that they have the right to go and have their record sealed? That's going back to section.
Subsection D in 1, 2.
Right, D, thank you.
Jonathan Norman for the record. So that provision, because we just heard summary evictions in here recently, I think. So we have the process where, the tenant initiates the lawsuit against themselves. They're filing the first pleading with the court.
Mm-hmm.
And so 31 days after the tenant has filed an affidavit described in, et cetera, the landlord has failed to file an affidavit of complaint. So if you think the tenant files the answer first, if for any reason the tenant vacates, the landlord and the tenant reach a conclusion, what happens with that open eviction case, right? So if the landlord fails to follow through with the complaint, that's sealing of that. And I misunderstood you when you first mentioned the 31 days, and I was talking about something else. So that's if the landlord never follows through with what they're supposed to do, we're sealing that case.
Okay, well, then the new language in 1B would give the tenant the right to file for a sealing, and the only thing that would prevent a judge from doing that is if the landlord didn't file within that 7-day window. I'm just kind of wondering, why do the landlord has successfully evicted a tenant. The tenant wants to have that cleaned up. Why does the burden on that fall on the landlord? If the landlord just says, okay, I'm done, let's move on, and then the tenant says, well, I want to seal this so that my future landlord doesn't know about it, why would that be the responsibility of the landlord that successfully evicted that person? If they don't follow through on something that 7 days after the fact, they're all done with it as far as they know, why would we then allow the tenant who has actually been evicted to kind of almost on their own go back and say, 7 days, I want to seal up my records? And the court will say, well, did the landlord file any objection? And no. Well, why would the landlord file an objection? They're done with the eviction process at that point, aren't they?
Thank you, Erica Roth, for the record. I think that you're getting at a very important point, and this bill actually brings some equity to the process, because the frustration that I think that you're having with the landlord having to respond is exactly the frustration that we see in the justice court level, where we require a tenant to file a suit against itself. So it actually brings parity to the process. Right now, as Mr. Norman alluded to, if a landlord places an eviction notice on a tenant's door and they are out of town for 7 days, they will come back and have been evicted by way of not filing a suit against themselves for failure to answer. And so what we're doing here is also bringing some parity to the process and some fairness to the process. Why do we require a tenant who may be out of town, may not understand the legal process, may not have any of that ability to respond? We are removing them from their homes. We're removing all of their worldly possessions from them, potentially. And so while I agree that I believe that we are bringing some parity to this. And I will also note that I don't think that requiring a landlord who has the ability to own property, to manage a property, however the way they do that, does not have the ability to respond to a legal filing. We expect that of a tenant, many of whom were my clients respectively, who are seniors, and judges are bound by the law. The summary eviction proceedings that exist in this state right now requires them to be evicting tenants such as mine, who was not bringing her trash to the corner. And that was one of hundreds of cases that I think you would agree are absolutely heartbreaking, and it is a travesty of justice that we are allowing that to occur in this state. But we do require a tenant to respond within 7 days, and so I do not see any bit of unfairness in requiring a landlord to step up and do the same.
Okay, well, I'd have to disagree politely, but I would also point out that it's not every tenant that after 7 days has been gone the whole time and didn't know there was a notice on their door. Secondly, I would imagine most landlords don't go after their tenants till probably at least 30 days after they failed to pay their rent. So when you start looking at the windows of time before those 7-day things, it's not like the person that's living in the place had no clue that they forgot to pay the rent and they were on vacation for 7 days or whatever. So last point that I want to make, and this is something, you mentioned snapshots in time. When I was a plumber, one thing that I noticed, I am a plumber, but when I was actually working in the field, I did a lot of work for Reno Housing Authority. And we have government subsidized housing for low-income people. And they were always fully occupied. And then I found out that the government agency could not ask the legal status of the people occupying the homes, and that those public housing units were being filled up with people that were illegally in the country. And so poor people like the 81-year-old lady you mentioned couldn't occupy it because the people were not even allowed to ask if the immigration status of the people occupying it. So American citizens that were poor couldn't occupy the public housing units that we had. That's a snapshot I think we ought to take into consideration as well when we look at the totality of the problems that we have impacting especially our poorest people in our country. So with that, thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, I'm not sure there was a question on that last part, and so if you want to respond, you don't need to. All right.
Madam Chair, it wasn't. It was
Okay.
just a snapshot of an observation that I had on some of the bigger problems that can impact poorer people who are forced into unusual rental situations when we as a government have in fact tried to provide low-income housing to American citizens.
I understand. I also think it's a little outside the scope of the bill, but I appreciate that we have open dialogue here. So I will go to Senator Ellison now.
Thank you. And Ms. Assemblywoman, I couldn't get your last name, so I hope you don't mind me calling Ms. Assemblywoman. The problem I had was you mentioned in there at first when you were testifying that for non-payment of rent, but also for damage. So if they have a unit damaged, you're saying that they could still have their record sealed? Because there's a difference between non-payment of rent and destruction of private property.
Erica Roth for the record. Yes, thank you for that question, Senator. That is correct, but I think, you know, the important point of all of this is that number one, when we're talking about somebody's, there is still consequences. So this does not reduce consequences. There are still civil actions that are initiated that would fall outside of an eviction proceeding regardless. So if there was damage to the property outside of an eviction proceeding, a landlord would still be required to seek those damages in likely a small claims court. And so all of those avenues, those still exist. However, if somebody were to damage a property and then seek to have their record sealed after 1 year, the landlord is able to respond and give that information to a judge. And then the judge determines whether or not it's appropriate to seal that record based on that information. And I think that's what's really important, is that we are not saying that you can do whatever you want to a property or act in any way in people's private property. A judge still reviews all of these cases.
Yeah, and then the other thing I had was, I don't know how they do it in Las Vegas, but in rural Nevada, you have to have a sheriff go out and post a door. They go 3 times trying to catch the people. They're not there after the 3rd time, you know, it might be 3 or 4 days or 5 days, whatever they can get time to go post them. After that, then the sheriff posts the door. Is that the same thing you have down in Vegas? When you post a door, the landlord can't post a door in rural Nevada. It has to go through the sheriff's department.
Jonathan Norman, for the record. We're not changing anything in the law for the posting. I think that's in 40.280. I don't have that in front of me, but my understanding is they can use usually it's the constable's office is going out and posting the notice, and then also once there is a lockout, that order goes to the constable's office. The constable's office is going to communicate with the landlord about, you know, when can you have the locksmith out there, and then they have to do a posting and come back. I think it's within 48 hours or no sooner than 48 hours to perform the lockout, but I might be off on those hours, but it's a very short time.
Yeah, and that's not a lockout, that's just a posting.
Jonathan Norman, for the record. So when you get we're not changing any of that in this bill, but, my understanding, and there might be somebody who's coming in public comment who can clarify further. When the judge orders a summary eviction, that order is transmitted to the constable's office to actually perform the lockout. And they have to do a posting on the door so that the tenant has an opportunity to remove property. And usually it's, I'm going out on a limb here, but and that's in chapter 40 is, they have to post, and it says no sooner than 48 hours we'll be back to perform the lockout. And they do that in coordination with the landlord, because obviously they need to have a locksmith there to, put in new locks, do whatever. So that'll remain the same.
And I apologize, Ms. Roots, that sometimes my brain goes this way. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, you don't look any better.
You upgraded me. I'll take the upgrade.
I didn't see her leave. Thank you.
Members, any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you both again for the presentation and engaging our questions. I'd like to invite both of you to sit back. And at this time, I'd like to invite those wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 201, either in Carson City or Las Vegas, to please come forward. I think some folk in Las Vegas, but we'll go ahead and start in Carson City and then make our way back to Vegas. Good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you, Senator Flores. Good afternoon, committee. My name is Ben Innes, that is B-E-N-I-N-E-S-S. I'm the coalition manager for the Nevada Housing Justice Alliance. We're a statewide coalition of grassroots organizers, community advocates. We work with tenants to fight for stronger tenant protections in the wake of our state's housing crisis. I think there's 2 points I will try to concisely make in my time. One, just really highlighting that eviction court is the culminating point of a host of factors, largely outside of tenants' control. There is no amount of, I think, financial literacy and good budgeting that is going to push back on limited tenant protections, our very rapid and difficult summary eviction process, habitability issues and the difficulty around enforcing that. I think Mr. Norman spoke to factors like RealPage and some of the price fixing schemes around there, the corporate takeover of our neighborhoods that are designed to be rented in perpetuity, and so on, all in the midst of historically high rents. And so folks who are struggling are funneled into eviction court. Mr. Norman mentioned our court watching program that we conducted over the interim. I will quickly highlight some of the top points that from that program, and then maybe I can send it to the committee if that would be helpful at all, our one pager. So we observed over 600 hearings during that time span. Mr. Norman mentioned it, but the average time of an eviction hearing was under 4 minutes. So the entire course of someone's life in that moment and all the cascading effects that come after decided, in a blink of an eye, it feels like. He spoke to the disproportionate impact on women, mothers, and women of color. It was 70% of all eviction hearings. This was particularly down south in Clark County. So Las Vegas Justice Court, North Las Vegas Justice Court, and Henderson. One particularly painful aspect is the refusal of landlords and property managers to accept rental assistance. So there could be a time, for them to be made whole and for tenants to stay housed, and they would reject that offer 80% of the time due to, again, a slow and kind of broken system around rental assistance. And then the last point I want to highlight is the use of judicial discretion. So depending what justice court you went to, you could be granted judicial discretion not to overturn or change the eviction, that's impossible, but to be granted just a matter of time to secure your belongings, secure new housing. Maybe your funds are coming in, and you have courts that will give tenants that time, and then other courts that will, again, chew folks up and spit them out very rapidly. And so I say all that to say is that again, as Mr. Norman mentioned, the cascading negative, destructive ripple effects of eviction hearing is a moment, but all the effects that are lasting afterward can be decided on a lot of unfair and broken systems. And am I doing on time, sir?
Please.
Okay.
We
20
do
more
have a lot of other people behind you, though.
Yes,
so
sir. 20 more seconds. I mean, it's really a bell curve. We have our bad landlords and our bad tenants, and those are, I think, slim areas, and we're really talking about the bulk of tenants and what that process looks like. And so I think I'm just trying to counter, the idea of bad tenants, destruction, and things like that. It's folks trying to stay housed, live with dignity, and survive and be happy, and things like that. So thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us. Good afternoon. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Emmy Miranda, EMYMIRANDA. For the record, I'm the Housing Justice Organizer for Make the Road Nevada, and here to support Bill AB 201. An eviction shouldn't be a life sentence. AB 201 gives people a fair chance to seal old eviction records and move forward with dignity and stability. This bill is about fairness, opportunity, and second chances. Please support this bill, and thank you for your time and consideration.
And thank you for joining us. Good afternoon. Welcome.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Tara Webster, TaraWebster. I'm here with the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, and I would just like to ditto the comments that were made before me by Mr. Ben Innes, and hope that we have your support on this bill.
Thank you for joining us. Good afternoon. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Riley Svensson, RYLEYSVENDSEN, and I am the Policy Specialist with the Nevada Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. NCE-DSV convenes the statewide Economic Justice Work Group, bringing together non-traditional violence prevention partners to advocate for increased economic equity, which the CDC has determined is one of the most effective ways to prevent and intervene in violence. This unique work group has 5 priority areas in which we focus, one of them being access to stable and affordable housing. Eviction impacts an individual's ability to easily seek and obtain housing, which often forces them into unsafe situations with increased risk for future violence. Furthermore, housing accessibility is often reported as the #1 barrier for an individual to leave an abusive relationship. Housing is already hard enough to obtain in today's landscape, and eviction records only amplify this issue. And while landlords cannot evict someone for experiencing domestic violence, many victim survivors find themselves faced with an eviction due to nuisance orders or because they simply cannot pay rent on time due to compounding economic abuse and coerced debt. Black and Hispanic women and families are disproportionately at risk for violence and eviction, both of which play into vicious cycles of housing instability, economic and financial insecurity, and continued risk of violence. With Nevada already facing a housing crisis and frivolous eviction filings amplifying this issue, AB 201 provides an opportunity to improve access to safe and affordable housing, especially for Nevadans already forced to the margins. It is violence prevention, and we urge you to support this important measure. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. I don't see anybody else stepping forward in Carson City, so we'll go to Las Vegas. Whoever wishes to go first.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is Jahiva Mendez, a member leader of Make the Road Nevada. I'm here today to fully support AB 201 for provision relating to sealing eviction records. Recently moving in 2007 to Nevada during the recession, I moved with a plane ticket and $300 to my name. And I had endured rough, struggling times, but during the pandemic, I received an eviction letter. As a cancer patient trying to survive during the pandemic, I lost my job. When I was on the verge of homelessness after struggling, I was behind on rent, which caused me to be evicted while I received it. It took me 7 years to finally have the evictions sealing records closed. After my eviction was off my name, I was finally able to invest and get a loan to buy my own mobile RV. After 3 years now, I have a comfortable, reliable place to come home. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Alejandro Ramos. I am a member to Make the Road Nevada, and I support the AB 201. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, committee. My name is Brianna Meadows
Pronouns she, her. Last name Meadows. I'm a housing justice organizer here with Make the Road Nevada. And I'm here, I support AB 201 because everyone deserves a second chance. When I was 24, I was evicted after losing my job and falling behind on rent. Years later, even after becoming more stable and responsible, that old eviction still prevented me from finding housing. AB 201 would help people like me by sealing certain records so past mistakes don't block future opportunities. Let's give people the chance to move forward. Please support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Lily Martinez, Lily Martinez. I am an economic justice organizer with Make the Road Nevada, and I support AB 201. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angela Reyes, and it's ANGELISYREYES. I support the bill for AB 201. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, dear chair and members of the committee. My name is Mary Wolfram, and WOLFROM, and I'm the lead organizer for Make the Run Nevada with economic justice, and I am fully support of Bill AB 201. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Saranda Neza, SARANDE, last name Aneze. I am a longtime community organizer, having worked previously with organizations such as Care in Action, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and the Nevada Housing Justice Alliance. As part of NHJA's court watching program last year, I personally witnessed over 200 eviction proceedings by multiple judges in multiple courtrooms throughout Clark County, most of which lasted no more than a couple of minutes. These renters were disproportionately women with small children, who were almost always ordered out with just a few days to move. Some of the judges would routinely rule that no eviction would go on the tenant's record as long as they vacated in the short time given. Others, on the other hand, seemed to do so only when they felt like it, happened to think about it, or had the request specifically made to them. Sorry. The results of having the eviction on one's credit report can be far-reaching, especially for families, and lead to years of housing instability and overall higher costs of living. Many families have no choice but to resort to short-term housing in these so-called weeklies for long-term periods of time. These places charge predatory rates and are often quite unsafe, especially for children. Because of what I have seen, I ask you today to please pass Assemblywoman Roth's bill to allow tenants a second chance on the most basic of all needs, a safe roof over their heads, and that of their families, not to be subjected to the arbitrary discretion of the judge that they happen to be assigned. Thank you so very much for your time.
And thank you for joining us. Is there anybody else wishing to join us in Carson City or Las Vegas? Seeing none, VPS will go to the phone lines and those wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 201.
Thank you, Vice Chair. If you would like to offer testimony in support of AB 201, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue.
Hi, good afternoon, Vice Chair Flores and committee members. My name is Brian Harris, that is BrianHarris, and I'm calling in support of AB 201. I'd like to ditto the comments made before me by others, and I urge you all to support this bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee.
My name is Jenna Vella, Jenna, V as in Victor, ELLA, and I'm the Programs and Partnerships Director at Battleborn Progress. We are proud to support AB 201. Eviction records, even when tenants win or landlords don't follow through, can unfairly block people from finding housing. AB 201 offers a fair way to seal those records and give Nevadans a real chance to move forward. Everyone deserves an opportunity for stable housing. We urge you to support this bill. Thank you so much for your time.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Shonda Johnson. I serve as the Executive Director of Faith in Action Nevada, and I'm also a member of the Nevada Housing Justice Alliance. I'm calling in today to express my strong support for Assembly Bill 201, which proposes the automatic sealing of certain eviction records. In our coalition court watching efforts last year, I witnessed many people facing eviction were dealing with a life crisis or circumstance not within their control. Evictions aren't moral failures of the tenant, but allowing evictions to affect their long-term housing access is. Eviction records, even from years past, can severely hinder individuals and families from securing stable housing, employment, and financial opportunities. These records disproportionately affect marginalized communities, including Black and Brown families, single mothers, and survivors of domestic violence, all who are individuals who are already navigating systemic barriers. By enacting Assembly Bill 201, we acknowledge that a single moment of hardship should not define a person's future. This bill offers a pathway to dignity and self-sufficiency, allowing our neighbors to rebuild their lives without the perpetual shadow of an eviction record. I urge you to pass AB 201 and affirm Nevada's commitment to justice, compassion, and the belief in second chances. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Ariana McConnell, ArianaMcConnell. I'm a third-year student at the William S. Boyd School of Law, and I'm also a student attorney with the Tenants' Rights Legal Residency in partnership with the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. From my very limited time representing tenants, I personally witnessed a lot of the circumstances that were discussed throughout today's hearing, and that could have benefited from this bill. So I just wanted to highlight a few. The very first case I actually worked on involved a single mother who successfully defended against an eviction. It was related to severe habitability issues. She was without AC in the dead of summer. Her children even experienced heat stroke. But the landlord forced the case through the appellate process. The district court affirmed, and she had 2 evictions that were on her side, but they slipped through the cracks and were never sealed. Another pertinent example I faced was a client having multiple evictions granted against her, some without her knowledge. The first eviction she experienced was the same month that she moved in, so no, landlords are not waiting 30 days. And worse, the default that was issued against her stained her record for years to come, but she continued to reside in that same property for months after. So it's hard to acknowledge as the public or any other landlord having an interest in knowing about her rental history when her own landlord continued to rent to her for months to come and even gave her a new lease the year after. The final example I thought might be relevant today was a tenant who was not on a pleasant vacation, but battling for her life in the hospital. She happened to have a family member notice that there was a 7-day pay or quit notice on her door. The family member went to the hearing with affirmative proof of her hospitalization, and the judge still granted an eviction against her and has to go through our record sealing process. So in my few months, I feel that we have exposed a lot of illogical inequities that are plaguing our system, and AB 201 is just one step towards the right direction of a level playing field. So I urge you to pass 201. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Seibel and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Joe Montelongo, Jomontelongo, and I'm calling today on behalf of Native Voters Alliance Nevada in strong support of AB 201. We are also proud members of the Nevada Housing Justice Alliance. Last summer, while court watching with the coalition, we witnessed 262 families push through summary eviction proceedings, some over in less than a minute, and we saw parents and children being forced from their homes, elders scrambling for a safe place to go, and working people doing everything they could just to stay afloat. But the consequences last a lifetime. Even when the tenants win an appeal, they're left with a public eviction record, a scarlet letter that locks them out of housing again and again. One mark, even if resolved, can be the reason your rental application ends up in the trash. AB 201 restores basic fairness. It seals records when tenants win an appeal, it makes sealing automatic when landlords don't object, and after a year, it says, enough. People deserve a real shot at moving forward. No one should be haunted by the worst moment of their life, especially when they're doing everything they can to get back on their feet. Pass AB 210 and give Nevadans a true path to stability. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kyle Rose, Kyle-E-R-O-S-E, and I am a third-year law student at the William S. Boyd School of Law and a student attorney with the Tenants' Rights Residency Clinic. I'm calling to express strong support for AB 201. Over the past semester, I've worked with Nevadans navigating the summary eviction process, and I have seen how a single eviction, even one that is resolved, dismissed, or caused by confusion or factors beyond the tenant's control, can still follow them for years as a permanent black mark, limiting access to housing, employment, credit, and overall stability. AB 201 provides a fair and necessary update to Nevada's record sealing process. It creates new paths for sealing eviction records when landlords don't respond to sealing motions within 7 days, which is the same timeline tenants are given to file their answer. It also allows sealing when tenants win on appeal or when records are simply outdated and the sealing serves in the interest of justice. Importantly, it also preserves landlords' rights, giving them the ability to object in appropriate cases, such as repeated or serious tenant violations. I've seen firsthand how vital this reform is. One client with a medically vulnerable child won her case, which was affirmed on appeal, but her eviction record stayed public for 6 months, costing her housing opportunities. Another tenant, evicted almost 9 years ago during a financial hardship, still faces housing barriers today because of that eviction record. And we worked with a disabled veteran burdened with duplicative eviction filings from a single tenancy. This is something that this bill would prevent. Beyond individual fairness, AB 201 makes sense from a policy perspective. Unsealed eviction records trap tenants in housing instability and make second chance housing harder to find. This deepens hardship and increases strain on public resources like homelessness services, rental aid, and healthcare. By expanding sealing opportunities where justice requires, AB 201 will stabilize families, lower public costs, and strengthen Nevada's housing market. Evictions often result from short-term crises like job loss, family instability, or medical emergencies, and not long-term irresponsibility. This bill ensures Nevadans are not punished long-term for temporary hardships. I respectfully urge your support. Thank you.
If you have recently joined us and would like to offer testimony in support of AB 201, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. There are no more callers wishing to offer support testimony at this time.
Thank you so much. We will move now to testimony in opposition to AB 201, starting here in person in Carson City.
Chair Scheibel, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Mark Fiorentino. I'm with the law firm of Kempfer Kroll. We represent the Nevada Multifamily Association, which is, for your information, a small group of companies that have for decades built, owned, and managed multifamily units here in Nevada. So they have deep roots in Nevada and do care deeply about the people of the state and the state's success. We want to thank Assemblymember Roth and Mr. Norman for working with us. We are sympathetic to the issues that they are trying to address in the bill. In fact, there are portions of the bill that we were willing to support. We tried to reach agreement on an amendment to address the sections of the bill that we had trouble with. We were unable to do that, and we respect that. And because of it, we felt it was important to record our opposition. So be happy to answer any questions that you have.
I'm not seeing any questions from the members at this point.
Thank you.
We appreciate you being here and offering to answer questions. I don't see anybody else in person in Carson City, so we will go down to Las Vegas. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Scheibel and Senate Judiciary Committee members. My name is Melissa Saragosa Stratton. I am also with the law firm of Kempfer Kroll, and I represent the Nevada Realtors who are in opposition to AB 201. The Nevada Realtors have basically three fundamental issues with the bill, though some said they thought it created a level playing field. We believe it removes what exists as a level playing field. First, in section 1.2b, you've heard it removes all judicial discretion in evaluating the basis for a tenant's request or motion to seal an eviction record by making it automatic should the landlord not file an opposition. What you fail to see in this bill, however, is any provision requiring that the tenant actually serve the motion on the landlord. The bill also fails to set forth any manner of service of that motion. These types of motions for summary eviction matters are not subject to the Nevada rules or Justice Court rules of civil procedure. This bill also fails to identify who should be served. Should it be the property manager? Should it be the owner? It also fails to set forth the timing of the service and how much time prior to any hearing would the landlord or owner or property manager need to be served. The proposal further assumes that the tenant properly served the motion, the landlord received the motion, and that the landlord is sophisticated enough to understand they must file a written opposition rather than have the opportunity to address it at a court hearing. Many of the mom and pop landlords do not have that level of understanding of the legal process. The Nevada Realtors believe every court should be required to evaluate the bases. All of the factual scenarios that we've heard from so many people that testified today are critical in a judicial decision on whether or not a motion to seal is warranted. By the implementation of this bill, it would create a rubber stamp and take all thought process out of the judiciary's hands. Likewise, the changes in section 1, subsection 3 remove the judicial discretion, which was previously and purposefully included in the law by imposing this presumption that the sealing of the eviction record after 1 year is in the interest of justice, again, without the ability to balance and weigh all of the factual circumstances. Instead, it replaces it with a higher level standard that a landlord would have to show clear and convincing evidence that it was in the public's best interest rather than an equal balance. The proposal requires the courts to essentially ignore the circumstances when more than 1 year has elapsed. There is a great deal of difference, as we've heard, between a tenant who is evicted for a temporary financial hardship or some temporary issue that prevented them from being able to meet financial obligations than a tenant who is evicted for criminal activity, nuisance, or illegal business. Nuisance, as defined in our laws, is disrupting the ability of the neighbors and the people surrounding that tenant from being able to quietly enjoy their property. Those are factors that landlords should know, and the public has the interest in hearing. The Nevada Realtors favor a law that allows our judiciary to determine under what circumstances the sealing of an eviction is in the interest of justice over this bill, which requires them to give more weight to the interests of the tenant than what justice requires. Finally, the language in 1.6 is troubling. It requires the court, and I'm not opposed to requiring a court to issue and set forth the basis of any decision they make. I think that, we think that's appropriate. But the problem is it requires them to make a decision, yet they're not making a decision. So I'm not sure what the basis for the decision would be or what a judicial officer would write if it's automatic. There would be no basis for the court to explain in an order. A couple of just final comments. One, it's important to note this has nothing to do with a credit report. The eviction records of the court system are not reported to credit agencies. If a credit agency, requests that information of the court, they may have it, but it doesn't seal a credit report. It only seals the court record. One other issue to consider is that once sealed, it is no longer visible. So under this automatic process, if an eviction is sealed and then the tenant is evicted again, and then that's sealed, and then they're evicted again, and that record is sealed, at some point, there is no ability for the court to even see those prior evictions that are sealed in order to balance that with all of the other factors. And one final comment is, I know there's been a lot of comment about judicial discretion. I don't think that judicial discretion is arbitrary, and we should trust in our elected officials to make the right decisions, all of our elected officials. If we feel that an elected official in a judicial position is not properly using their judicial discretion, I don't think the fix for that is legislative action. It's perhaps part of what the campaign process is designed to do, or to weed out those who are not doing their job as public would expect them to be. Finally, the bill creates a lack of balance at the law, where it violates a landlord's basic due process in the notice proceeding of the notice of even the motion that exists, and inappropriately creates this presumption. For those reasons, the Nevada Realtors strongly urge you to reject AB 201. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you so much. At this time, I'm going to excuse all of the members of my committee who have 3:30 committees, which is all but one of you. So actually you all can go, and then you'll never know who it was who took this opportune moment to leave early. But truly, I know we've had a long day. We started right after floor, but if we run late, GA runs late, something else runs late. So that's why everybody is getting up and leaving, not because we're not interested in what you all have to say. I don't see anybody else coming forward to give maybe there is someone else coming forward to give opposition testimony on 201, AB 201 in Las Vegas. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, CYRUS HOJJA2Y. I stand in opposition. This will reduce the incentive for people to pay their rent, as it seems. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I will ditto the previous commentators. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Now I don't see anybody else coming forward to give opposition testimony in person in Las Vegas or Carson City. We will go to the phones for opposition testimony on AB 201.
Thank you, Chair. The public lines are open and working. However, there are no callers to provide opposition testimony at this time.
All right, then we will go to neutral testimony. Anybody wishing to testify in neutral in person in Carson City or Las Vegas is invited forward to do so now. You have to press the button. It looks like a sticker on the far right side of the table. It will turn bright red.
Oh, there it is.
There you go.
Much better.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not going to do much in the question and answer part. My wife is much more articulate in such matters. And honorable members of the Senate, thank you for hearing me. My name is Peter Profont. I'm a Nevada voter, spouse of Alexandra Profont, who's next to me here. Please consider in your discussions when deliberating on AB 201 the following. Any summary adjudication in electronic formats where tenants or owners do not have attorneys interferes with any mechanism to enforce due process or recover stolen homes. Laws passed by you calling out procedures in our NRS evictions, summary evictions, are in direct conflict with binding law used to protect owners from pretended owners and false claims. And I am an owner who awaits a bogus foreclosure to be prosecuted, where my right to possess and protect my home is held to be, which is held to be inalienable according to Article 1, Section 1 of the Nevada's Constitution, Declaration of Rights. So in 2014, I was deemed, along with my wife, Alexandra, as a whistleblower by the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, where we tendered amounts that were alleged to be owed and redemption was denied. So according to U.S. States Public Acts, U.S. Code 7102 of Section 1590, Article 6 of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, it deems credible information to include, under E, information from survivors of human trafficking, vulnerable persons, and whistleblowers. And under 8B, involuntary servitude includes abuse of the legal process. So all of you must ask yourselves, if sealing records of the courts during COVID would prevent discovery of abuse of the legal process, it may constitute human trafficking. And I submit this with my wife and a docket from case CV 22-00045 and an order from Judge Connie Steinheimer relevant to this testimony. So thank you for your service to the great state of Nevada, and that finishes this.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Alexandra Profont. I grew up in Washoe County, where I was known as Don Tetu, and before I went out in the world to pursue my passion in architecture, I brought back to the West Coast to co-found the Tahoe Foundation to educate my fellow Western Americans about the role architecture conservation plays in the preservation of histories. Please see the Foundation's submission to support this testimony provided to you and uploaded to Nellis. There are issues relevant to this Nevada's charity and how this charity has been wholly interrupted, and NAGBRA protections for property that is missing in action, and we hope to recover with the help of the sheriffs. My largest issue with this bill is that in Section 1, subsections 4 and 5, it states if the court orders an eviction case court filed, it will be deemed to have never occurred. In 5, it also, without limitation, will prevent people from inspecting records, including the sheriff or constable. When one is a victim of the abuse of the legal process, the proper legal paper based in traditional procedural legal process simply becomes an unknown. We have been victims and witnesses to eviction processes where the electronic formats are commingled with traditional and varied courts where attorneys have actually lied, and we have no cause to believe a judge ever reviewed anything due to the confusion caused by the electronic filing system. This is why falsity must stand in records so as to be seen and investigated to establish the patterns and practice by bad actors and their clients or staff for discovery to be used to effectuate a prosecution, and where said records in the court are evidence and history preserved for successful identification and protection of victims' rights, and for speedy convictions of the bad actor criminals attempting to grab the collateral so as to keep securities frauds in play under the guise of residential or commercial mortgage-backed securities. The complexity and potential of criminal acts embedded into electronic spheres and additive when computers and invisible operators are using keyboards to mute historic and traditional processes preserved through paper in the haptic human hand like a judge's signature is tantamount to this discussion. The sealing of records is not the answer when redactions of personal information is the obvious and already accepted method to protect victims. Suspending statutes of limitation to prosecution of crimes such as these makes much more sense. For me to testify in order to help you help victims to find remedies where the protection of property is called out as Nevada's first inalienable right, I believe each of you have sworn oaths to protect as cause for any of us who have been unlawfully removed from our homes to have them immediately restored to us by your ability to enact legislation to do so. And in our case, I would like to return to my home in Incline Village before Mother's Day in the interest of justice and as an act of good faith to mitigate further damages. I'm open to any questions as we have been doing research actively on this issue to protect property and histories in the state of Nevada for 15 years. Thank you very much for your service.
Thank you both so much for your testimony. I don't think we have any questions. We appreciate you being here and providing us with that information. I don't see anybody else coming forward to give neutral testimony in Carson City or Las Vegas, so we'll go to the phones, please, for neutral testimony on AB 201.
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to provide neutral testimony for AB 201, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, press star 6 to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, Chair. This is Kimberly Fergus, FERGUS. I do have an issue here. I am in opposition, and I did raise my hand, and I don't know if you guys have a technical issue, but I've been getting overlooked. I would like my testimony to go into opposition. Is that possible?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kimberly Fergus, FERGUS. These are facts. In 2024, Clark County, Nevada, I only did it in Clark, experienced a significant number of eviction filings. According to the data from the eviction lab, approximately 38,000 households in the county received eviction notices during that year. This figure indicates a persistent housing instability in the region, with monthly eviction filings remaining substantially higher than the pre-pandemic levels. For instance, in September of 2024 alone, 4,400 families were served with notices to vacate their homes, a number that is 39% higher than the average monthly filings before the COVID-19 pandemic. Overall, from March 2020 through August 2024, there were 190,133 eviction filings in Clark County, marking a 21% increase compared to pre-pandemic levels. These statistics underscore the ongoing challenges faced by renters in policies like renters in Clark County, and highlight the importance of carefully considering policies like AB 201, which proposes automatic sealing of certain eviction records. Given the high volume of eviction filings, it is crucial to balance tenant protections with the need of transparency and accountability in the housing market. I strongly suggest that you take a look at these statistics and reconsider your votes and vote no on this bill. Thank you.
There are no further callers to offer testimony at this time.
All right, then that brings us to the conclusion of testimony. I'll invite our presenters back for closing remarks. Please go ahead.
Jonathan Norman for the record. Thank you for staying so late, and I'll be super brief. 2 points. One, it's critical for tenants to understand why their sealing was denied. So the idea that a judge has to provide a basis is just logical. What we get now is often just check boxes, denied or approved. Like, it doesn't give any idea for tenants. And then second, when we talk about judicial discretion and trusting our elected judges because they're accountable to the people, 75% of the evictions in the state are in Las Vegas Justice Court. Las Vegas Justice Court uses unelected hearing officers to hear eviction cases. So the idea that, our community can go to the ballot and hold those unelected judicial officers accountable is just not real. So again, thank you for hearing this bill. I think it's important for folks to be able to move on with their lives eventually when appropriate. So thank you again.
Thank you, Erica Roth for the record. I will just briefly, I know we're all trying to leave. One last thing I want to point on is that I believe in opposition testimony, it was asserted that, we could get people who are serially filing for these record sealings. And as the law currently stands and in practice, we see serial eviction filers on behalf of landlords who are continuously piling evictions on top of tenants over and over and over again. And so we've said this in the other house, we're more than happy to work on that part. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. So if they would like to deal with serial people who've been evicted, we will also be looking to deal with landlords who are doing the same. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I will close the hearing on AB 201. That brings us to the final item on our agenda for today, which is public comment. Anybody wishing to give public comment is invited forward to do so now. I don't see anybody coming forward in person, so we'll go to the phones, please, for public comment.
Thank you, Chair. The public lines are open and working. However, there are no callers to provide public comment at this time.
All right, then that brings us to the conclusion of our meeting for today. We will be meeting again tomorrow, same time, same place. Until then, we are adjourned.